You know what they say about karma? Well, let me tell you about the day I watched a man in a $3,000 suit learn that money can't buy class, dignity, or, most importantly, the truth. My name is Margaret Helen Crawford, I'm 72 years old. And I'm about to tell you how the most humiliating moment of my life became the sweetest victory I never saw coming. It started on a Tuesday morning at Henderson and Associates law firm in downtown Charleston. I remember because Tuesdays were always my grocery shopping days at the Piggly Wiggly, and I had to reschedule my entire week just to make this appointment. I'd been married to James Crawford for 47 years before the good Lord called him home last spring. 47 years of modest living, church potlucks, and clipping coupons from the Sunday paper. We never had much, but we had each other, and that was always enough. I pulled up to the law office in my 2003 Honda Civic, the same one James bought me for our anniversary 17 years ago. The check engine light had been on for 6 months, but I couldn't afford to fix it. Not on my Social Security checks. The building was one of those fancy historic Charleston mansions on Broad Street. The kind with white columns and black shutters that tourists photograph while walking their ghost tours at night. My hands were shaking as I parallel parked. I'd never been good at parallel parking, and James always did it for me. It took me 4 tries, and I could see a young woman in yoga pants watching me from the sidewalk, probably judging me. I didn't care. I'd learned a long time ago that your worth isn't measured by how well you park a car. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one with white palheras that I bought at Belk's 3 years ago for Easter service. I'd ironed it twice that morning. My shoes were from Payless, comfortable but worn at the heels. I carried my old Coach purse, a genuine one that James had saved up for and given me on our 25th anniversary. The leather was cracked now, but I'd never replace it. It held too many memories. The attorney's letter had arrived 2 weeks earlier, certified mail. It said James's estate needed to be settled, and there were matters of significant importance to discuss. I couldn't imagine what that meant. We didn't have an estate. We had a 2-bedroom ranch house in Mount Pleasant with a mortgage that was finally paid off last year. A saving account with maybe $8,000. And James's 1995 Ford F-150 pickup truck that barely ran. That was it. That was our whole life, accumulated over nearly 5 decades. The receptionist, a young girl with perfect makeup and one of those fancy Apple watches, looked up when I entered. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice friendly enough, though I caught her glancing at my shoes. "I have an appointment at 10 o'clock. Margaret Crawford." She typed on her computer, those long acrylic nails clicking against the keyboard. "Yes, Mrs. Crawford. For the reading of James Alexander Crawford's will. You're actually a bit early. Mr. Henderson is running about 15 minutes behind. Would you like some coffee?" "That would be lovely, dear. Just black, please." The waiting room was beautiful, all mahogany furniture and oil paintings of old ships at sea. I sat on a leather chair that was probably worth more than my entire living room set. The coffee came in a real china cup with a saucer, not a styrofoam cup like at the church fellowship hall. I held it carefully, terrified I'd spill on their expensive carpet. That's when he walked in, Alexander James Crawford III. I'd never met him before that day, but I knew exactly who he was the moment I saw him. He had James's eyes, the same gray-blue that could look like storm clouds or clear skies depending on his mood. But that's where the resemblance ended. He was tall, probably 6'3", wearing a suit that I later learned was Armani. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he wore a watch that probably cost more than my car. His dark hair was perfectly styled with just enough gray at the temples to make him look distinguished rather than old. He was 52 years old, James had told me once, though they hadn't spoken in over 20 years. James's son from his first marriage. The son who'd made his fortune in tech, who'd sold his company for $800 million, who'd been featured in Forbes magazine. The son who'd never called when his father was dying of pancreatic cancer. Not once. He looked at me with those familiar eyes, and I saw no recognition. No warmth. Nothing. "Are you the secretary?" he asked, his voice crisp and efficient. "I need to see Mr. Henderson immediately." I have a meeting in Charlotte at 2, and I can't be late. I felt my cheeks burn. No, never mind, he interrupted, pulling out his phone. Just tell Henderson that Alexander Crawford is here. He'll know who I am. The receptionist jumped up. Mr. Crawford. Yes, sir. Let me tell Mr. Henderson you've arrived. Can I get you anything? Espresso? Cappuccino? We have sparkling water, double espresso. Make it quick. He didn't even glance at me again as he chose a seat on the opposite side of the room. He immediately started typing on his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. I could hear the expensive sound of his leather shoes against the hardwood floor when he crossed his legs. Everything about him screamed wealth, power, success, everything about me screamed. Well, not that. I sipped my coffee and tried to steady my nerves. Why was he here? James barely ever mentioned him. I knew the story, of course. James had been young when he married Alexander's mother, Vivian. They'd divorced when Alexander was just 5 years old. Vivian had remarried almost immediately to a wealthy banker and moved to Charlotte. She'd made it difficult for James to see his son, and as the years passed, the visits became less frequent, then stopped altogether. James had tried to reconnect over the years. He'd sent birthday cards, Christmas cards. He'd driven to Charlotte more times than I could count, only to be turned away at the door. When Alexander went to Princeton, James sent a congratulations card with a check for $500, money we really couldn't spare. The check was never cashed. It came back to us, torn in half, with a note in Vivian's handwriting, "He doesn't need your charity." After that, James stopped trying. It broke something in him, a piece that never quite healed. On his deathbed, morphine-clouded and barely conscious, he'd whispered, "I failed him, Margaret. I failed my boy." I'd held his hand and told him he hadn't failed anyone. But I wasn't sure he heard me. Now here sat that boy, hey. Middle-aged man worth more money than I could even comprehend. And he couldn't even be bothered to look at the woman who'd loved his father through sickness and health. Through good times and bad, until death did us part. The receptionist brought Alexander his double espresso in a tiny cup. He took it without thanking her. "Mrs. Crawford? Mr. Crawford?" A tall, silver-haired man in his 60s appeared in the doorway. "I'm Robert Henderson. Please, both of you, come back to my office." Mr. Henderson's office was even more impressive than the waiting room. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound law books. A massive desk made of some dark wood I couldn't name. Windows overlooking the Charleston harbor, where sailboats bobbed in the morning sun. "Please. Have a seat." Mr. Henderson gestured to 2 chairs facing his desk. Alexander sat down immediately, already checking his watch. I lowered myself carefully into the other chair, my purse clutched in my lap.mr. Henderson settled behind his desk and pulled out a thick folder. "First, let me express my condolences to both of you. James was a good man, and his passing is a loss to everyone who knew him." "Thank you," I whispered. Alexander said nothing. He was still looking at his phone. "Now, I'll try to make this as brief as possible, as I understand you both have busy schedules." Mr. Henderson looked at me with kind eyes. He knew I didn't have any schedule at all. James Crawford came to see me approximately 14 months ago to update his will and make some final arrangements. He was very specific about his wishes. He pulled out several documents. The estate consists of several assets, including the family home at 428 Magnolia Lane in Mount Pleasant, 1 vehicle, various personal possessions, and, how much? Alexander interrupted.mr. Henderson paused. "Excuse me? How much is the estate worth in total? I don't need the itemized list. Just give me the bottom line. I assume there's some debt to settle, maybe funeral expenses. I'll write a check and we can wrap this up." I felt like I'd been slapped. Funeral expenses. He didn't even come to his father's funeral. "Mr. Crawford," Mr. Henderson said carefully, "this process requires us to go through the documents properly. If you'll allow me to, look, I'm trying to be patient here, but I really don't have time for this." Alexander leaned forward. "My father and I weren't close. That's no secret. I'm sure he left everything to his wife, which is fine. I don't need anything from him. I never did. So let's just sign whatever needs to be signed, and I can get back to Charlotte." Mr. Henderson folded his hands on his desk. "I'm afraid it's not quite that simple." "What do you mean?" Alexander's voice had an edge now. "Your father's estate is more complex than you might think. There are assets beyond the house and vehicle that need to be addressed." I frowned. "What assets?" James and I had lived on his salary from the electric company. He'd retired on a modest pension. We'd never had investments or stocks or anything like that. "James made very specific provisions in his will," Mr. Henderson continued. "And before we can proceed, I need to share some information that might come as a surprise to both of you." Alexander finally put down his phone. "What kind of information?" Mr. Henderson pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. James Crawford maintained a life insurance policy. A substantial one. I leaned forward. "Life insurance?" "James never mentioned any life insurance. He took it out 30 years ago, shortly after you married, Mrs. Crawford. He paid the premiums faithfully every month, never missing a payment. It was a whole life policy with an investment component." "How much?" Alexander asked again. "The death benefit, combined with the accumulated cash value and investment returns over 3 decades, comes to approximately $2.3 million. The room went silent. I could hear the antique clock on the mantel ticking. Tick, tick, tick. "I'm sorry," I finally managed. "Did you say million?" Mr. Henderson nodded gently. "Yes, Mrs. Crawford. Your husband was very careful with money, very disciplined. He invested the cash value wisely over the years, always reinvesting the dividends. It grew significantly." I couldn't breathe. $2.3 million. James had scraped together $2.3 million while we were clipping coupons and shopping at Goodwill. While I was buying day-old bread from the Hostess outlet. While he was packing his lunch in an old igloo cooler every single day for 40 years. "Why?" I whispered. "Why didn't he tell me?" "He wanted to provide for you, Mrs. Crawford. He knew that Social Security wouldn't be enough. He wanted you to be comfortable after he was gone." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "Oh, James. My sweet, stubborn, proud James." Alexander cleared his throat. "Well, that's wonderful for Margaret. But I still don't understand why I'm here. Like I said, I don't need anything." "There's more," Mr. Henderson interrupted. He pulled out another document. "Your father also maintained several investment accounts. Stocks, mutual funds, bonds. He started with very small amounts, sometimes just $50 a month, but he was consistent, and he was patient. Over 47 years, with compound interest and careful management, those investments grew to approximately $7 million. I actually laughed. It was a shocked, hysterical sound. "That's impossible. That's absolutely impossible. We lived in a tiny house. We drove old cars. We never went on vacations. We ate hamburger helper and tuna casserole. We watched a television that was 15 years old. How could James have $7 million? Mr. Henderson smiled sadly. "Your husband was a remarkable man, Mrs. Crawford. He understood something that many people never learn. Wealth isn't about how much you spend, it's about how much you keep and grow. He lived below his means, he avoided debt, and he invested consistently for nearly half a century. He read every investment book he could find from the library. He studied the market. He was patient and disciplined." "But why?" I asked again. "Why live like that if we had money?" "Because he loved you," Mr. Henderson said simply. "He wanted to make sure you would never have to worry, never have to struggle, never have to depend on anyone after he was gone. He told me, and I quote, Margaret gave up everything to marry me. She could have had a man with money, with prospects. But she chose me, a divorced electrician with a kid who hated him. She chose me, and she never complained, not once in 47 years. She deserves to live like a queen." I covered my face with my hands and sobbed. The navy blue dress from Belk's was getting soaked with tears, but I didn't care. Alexander shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's very touching. I'm happy for Margaret. She obviously meant a lot to my father. More than I did. There was bitterness in his voice, but also something else. Something that might have been pain. There's still more, Mr. Henderson said quietly. More? Alexander asked. How much more could there possibly be? Mr. Henderson pulled out a thick stack of papers. In addition to the insurance and investments, your father owned property. Quite a bit of property, actually. Property? I was completely lost now. Starting about 35 years ago, James began purchasing small parcels of land around Charleston. Nothing fancy, empty lots, old buildings slated for demolition, foreclosed properties. He bought them at tax auctions, estate sales, wherever he could find a bargain. He never told you, Mrs. Crawford, because he didn't want you to worry about the risk. But he was careful. He did his research. He bought in areas that he believed would eventually develop. And Alexander was leaning forward now, interested despite himself. And he was right. Charleston has experienced tremendous growth over the past 3 decades. Several of the properties your father purchased are now in prime locations. One lot he bought for $18,000 in 1992 is now worth $3.2 million. An old warehouse he purchased for $35,000 in 1998 was recently appraised at $5.7 million. Mr. Henderson slid a portfolio across the desk. In total, your father owned 17 properties around Charleston, plus 6 rental properties that have been managed by a local company, generating income for years. The total value of the real estate holdings is approximately $42 million. The clock kept ticking. Tick, tick, tick. 42 million, Alexander repeated slowly. Yes, sir. My father who worked as an electrician, who drove a pickup truck that barely ran, who I assumed died with barely enough to pay for his own funeral, had $50 million. Closer to $53 million when you factor in all the assets, yes. Alexander stood up abruptly. His face had gone pale. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. Why would anyone live like that? Why would anyone with that much money choose to live in poverty? He didn't live in poverty, Mr. Crawford, Mr. Henderson said firmly. He lived with purpose. There's a difference. He had everything he needed, a home, food, a wife he loved. The money was never for him. It was always for the future. Well, congratulations, Margaret, Alexander said, his voice tight. You've won the lottery. I hope you enjoy it. He turned to leave. Mr. Crawford, Mr. Henderson said sharply. Sit down. We're not finished. Alexander turned back. What else could there possibly be? Your father's will. We haven't discussed the actual distribution of the estate yet. Alexander froze. What do you mean? It all goes to Margaret, doesn't it? She's the widow. Please, sit down. Alexander slowly returned to his chair. I watched him, this stranger who looked so much like the man I'd loved, and I felt sorry for him. He'd missed so much. He'd missed everything that mattered. Mr. Henderson opened the will, an official-looking document with blue backing. James Crawford's last will and testament, dated April 12th of last year. I'll skip the legal formalities and get to the relevant sections. He adjusted his reading glasses. To my beloved wife, Margaret Helen Crawford, I leave the family home at 428 Magnolia Lane, free and clear, along with all furnishings and personal property contained therein. I also leave her my vehicle and all personal effects. I nodded. That made sense. That was what I expected. Additionally, I leave to Margaret the sum of $5 million from my investment accounts, to be transferred to her immediately upon my death, with no restrictions or conditions. This money is hers to use as she sees fit, whether for living expenses, charitable giving, or any purpose she chooses. She has earned every penny through 47 years of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. $5 million. For me. I couldn't even process it. I also leave to Margaret 50% ownership of all rental properties, which will continue to generate income for her maintenance and comfort. Mr. Henderson paused and looked up. Mrs. Crawford, the rental properties currently generate approximately $32,000 per month in net income after expenses and property management fees. $32,000. Every month. More than I'd made in a year working as a secretary before I retired. Alexander was gripping the arms of his chair. And the rest? Mr. Henderson turned to a new page. To my son, Alexander James Crawford III, I leave the remainder of my estate. Alexander blinked. The remainder? Yes, sir. The remaining investment accounts, totaling approximately $2 million. The life insurance proceeds of $2.3 million. The other 50% of the rental properties. And all of the non-rental real estate holdings, approximately $42 million worth. The numbers hung in the air like smoke. He left me almost all of it. Alexander's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, sir. Approximately $48 million. But I didn't. There are conditions, Mr. Henderson continued, his voice gentle now. The inheritance is held in a trust. You cannot access the principal for 5 years. However, the trust will pay you a monthly stipend of $10,000 for living expenses. Alexander laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. I don't need $10,000. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And the income generated by the properties and investments will be donated to various charities specified by your father. The Pancreatic Cancer Research Foundation. The Charleston Habitat for Humanity. The Lowcountry Food Bank. Several scholarships for children of divorced parents. Mr. Henderson pulled out another document. After 5 years, you will gain full access to the inheritance, with one final condition. What condition? You must read these. Mr. Henderson placed a box on the desk. It was an old shoebox, worn at the corners. These are letters your father wrote to you. One for every birthday he missed. One for every Christmas. One for every Father's Day he spent alone. He wrote to you for 47 years, Mr. Crawford. He never sent them because he didn't think you'd read them. But now, they're part of your inheritance. You must read every single letter before you can access the trust. Alexander stared at the box like it was a snake. How many letters? 243. The room was completely silent except for that damn clock. Tick, tick, tick. Why? Alexander finally asked, his voice cracking. Why would he do this? Why leave me anything at all? I abandoned him. I chose my mother and her money over him. I never called. I never visited. I didn't even come to his funeral. Why would he leave me anything? Mr. Henderson removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Your father asked me to read you something if you asked that question. He anticipated you would. He pulled out a handwritten letter, James's familiar scrawl across the page. He wrote this the week before he died. He began to read, Alexander, if you're hearing this, I'm gone, and you're probably angry. You're probably confused. You might even think this is some kind of punishment or manipulation from beyond the grave. It's not. I'm leaving you this inheritance because you're my son, and I love you, and I always have, even when you couldn't love me back. I know you think I was a failure. I know you think your stepfather was a better man because he had money and success. Maybe he was a better man. But I was your father, and that meant something to me, even if it never meant anything to you. This money isn't to make up for lost time. Nothing can do that. This money is to show you that success isn't what you think it is. I was successful. I had a woman who loved me. I had a job I was good at. I had friends at church. I had Sunday dinners and Tuesday bowling leagues and Friday night fish fries at the VFW. I had a life, Alexander. A good life. A rich life. Not rich in money, though I managed to save quite a bit, I suppose, but rich in the things that matter. I hope this money helps you understand that. I hope these letters help you know me. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, son. I hope you find peace. Mr. Henderson folded the letter carefully. That's all he wrote. Alexander stood up slowly. His hands were shaking. I need some air. Of course, Mr. Crawford. Take all the time you need. We can finish the paperwork another day. Alexander walked to the door, then stopped. He turned back to look at me for the first time, really look at me. Did he? Did he ever talk about me? I met his eyes, those eyes so like James's, and I told him the truth. Every day. Every single day for 47 years. His face crumpled. Just for a moment, the billionaire in the Armani suit disappeared, and I saw a 5-year-old boy who missed his daddy. Then he was gone. The phone call came on a Wednesday evening. I was in my kitchen, my newly renovated kitchen, though I'd felt guilty spending the money, making tuna casserole. Old habits die hard. Mrs. Crawford? This is Alexander. I nearly dropped the can of cream of mushroom soup. Alexander. Hello. I was wondering if I could come see you. If that would be okay. Of course. When? Now? I'm actually parked outside your house. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to get up the courage to knock. I looked down at my house dress and apron. Give me 5 minutes to look presentable. You don't have to, 5 minutes. Alexander. I changed into a nicer dress, ran a comb through my white hair, and put on lipstick for the first time since James's funeral. When I opened the door, Alexander was standing on my porch, holding the shoebox. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair uncombed. The Armani suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a rumpled button-down shirt. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Come in, I said gently. He followed me into the living room. I offered him sweet tea, that's what you offer people in South Carolina, and he accepted. We sat in the living room, him on the sofa, me in James's old recliner. I still couldn't bring myself to sit anywhere else. I've been reading the letters, he said without preamble. All of them. It took me 3 weeks. I've barely gone to work. I've barely slept. I just read. And I didn't know him at all. His voice broke. My whole life, I thought I knew exactly who my father was. A failure. A nobody. A man who couldn't provide for his family, who lost his wife, who wasn't good enough for my mother or me. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. But he wasn't any of those things. He was brilliant. He was kind. He was funny. He had opinions about everything, politics, sports, books, music. He had dreams. He had fears. He had this whole rich inner life, and I never knew any of it. I sipped my tea and waited. Sometimes people just need to talk. There's a letter from my 10th birthday, Alexander continued. He wrote about how he drove to Charlotte to try to see me. He brought a present, a model airplane he'd built by hand. It took him 3 months. He waited outside my mother's house for 4 hours, but her husband threatened to call the police if he didn't leave. So he left the present on the porch and drove home. I remember that airplane, I said softly. He was so proud of it. He kept hoping you'd call to say thank you. I never saw it. My mother probably threw it away. Alexander wiped his eyes roughly. Do you know how many times he tried to see me? According to these letters, he came to Charlotte at least once a month for 10 years. He never told me. He never told anyone except you, I suppose. He didn't tell me most of it, I admitted. He didn't want me to see how much it hurt. My mother poisoned me against him, Alexander said bitterly. She told me he was abusive, that he'd abandoned us, that he never paid child support. She said he was a drunk and a deadbeat. I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. She was hurt, I offered, though I didn't really want to defend Vivian Crawford. Your father told me their marriage fell apart because he wouldn't play the games she wanted. He wouldn't pretend to be someone he wasn't. He wouldn't spend money they didn't have to impress people he didn't like. There's a letter from when I went to Princeton, Alexander said. He wrote about how proud he was. How he knew I'd do great things. He said he saw a photo of me in the newspaper and cut it out and carried it in his wallet. He pulled out a worn leather wallet from his pocket. James's wallet. Mr. Henderson gave me this. His personal effects. The photo is still in here. It's been there for 30 years. He opened the wallet and showed me. There was my James, forever young in the driver's license photo from the 90s. And tucked behind it, a yellowed newspaper clipping of a young Alexander in a Princeton sweatshirt, smiling at the camera. He carried me with him, Alexander whispered. Every single day. Of course he did. You were his son. But I wasn't his son. Not really. I never acted like it. I set down my tea and leaned forward. Alexander, can I tell you something? He nodded. Your father never blamed you. Not once. Not ever. He blamed himself. He blamed your mother sometimes, though he tried not to. But he never blamed you. You were a child when your parents divorced. You were raised with certain stories, certain beliefs. You couldn't have known they weren't true. I'm 52 years old, Margaret. At some point, I should have questioned those stories. I should have reached out. I should have tried. Maybe. But you didn't, and that's done now. The question is, what are you going to do with the gift your father gave you? What gift? The money? No, I said firmly. The letters. The truth. The chance to finally know him. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. There's a letter from 3 months before he died. He wrote about you. About your marriage. Oh? He said marrying you was the best decision he ever made. He said you saved his life after I left. He said you gave him a reason to wake up every morning, a reason to keep going. He said you were his angel. My eyes filled with tears. He was mine too. Margaret, I need to tell you something, Alexander said, his voice urgent now. That day at the lawyer's office, I was horrible to you. I looked at you and saw. I don't know what I saw. Poverty, I guess. Weakness. Someone beneath me. And I felt righteous about it, like I'd risen above my raising, like I was better than where I came from. I know, I said simply. But you knew all along, didn't you? About the money? About the investments? I shook my head. I had no idea. James handled all the finances. I balanced the checkbook for our regular accounts, but I never knew about the rest. He kept it completely separate. Why would he hide it from you? Because he knew me. He knew I'd feel guilty spending money when there were people in need. He knew I'd want to give it all away to the church or the food bank. He wanted me to have security, even if it meant keeping secrets. Alexander laughed, but it was a sad sound. He was protecting you. Even from your own good heart. He was always protecting me. That's what love is, Alexander. It's 47 years of small protections, small sacrifices, small moments of putting someone else first. There's something else, Alexander said. I've been researching the properties my father bought. I wanted to understand his investment strategy, figure out how he knew where to buy. And it wasn't random. Every single property he purchased was in a neighborhood he believed would help the community. He bought empty lots and turned them into pocket parks. He bought abandoned buildings and renovated them into affordable housing. He bought properties near schools and sold them at cost to families who couldn't afford homes elsewhere. I frowned. But Mr. Henderson said the properties were worth millions. They are now. But that's not why he bought them. I found correspondence with the property management company. He gave them specific instructions: keep rents low, never evict families with children, do free repairs for elderly tenants. He was losing money on purpose on half the properties. That sounds like James. The properties that made money, the ones in areas that gentrified despite his efforts, he never sold. He held on to them, and all the profit went right back into the properties that didn't make money. It was a completely closed system. He was basically running a private charity disguised as a real estate business. Alexander pulled out a folder. I found something else. For the past 15 years, he's been paying college tuition for children of divorced parents. Full scholarships, anonymously. He's put 37 kids through college. 37 kids who reminded him of me, I suppose. He never said a word, I breathed. He didn't want credit. He just wanted to help. Alexander stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. I sold my company for $800 million. I thought I was a genius. I thought I'd made it. I've spent the last decade collecting cars and houses and watches and all this meaningless garbage. And my father, a man I thought was a failure, did more good with $50 million he built from nothing than I've done with everything I have. He turned back to me. I want to finish what he started. I want to use my inheritance the way he would have wanted. I want to expand the scholarship program. I want to buy more properties and create more affordable housing. I want to. He trailed off. I want to make him proud. He was always proud of you, Alexander. But I want to deserve it. For the first time in my life, I want to deserve his pride. I stood and walked over to him. I'm not a tall woman, barely 5'3", and I had to look up at this man who towered over me. Then do it. You have time. You have resources. You have your father's example. That's more than most people get. Will you help me? I blinked. Help you? Alexander, I don't know anything about business or investments that's not what I need. I need someone who knew him. Someone who can tell me what he would do. Someone who can keep me honest. He took my hands in his. I need a mother. The word hung between us like a prayer. I never tried to replace your mother, I said carefully. I never wanted to. I know. But she's gone now. She passed away 2 years ago. And even when she was alive, she never. He couldn't finish the sentence. I squeezed his hands. I would be honored to help you, Alexander. I think your father would like that very much. There's something I need to tell you too, I said, leading him back to the sofa. Something I've been thinking about since that meeting at Mr. Henderson's office. What is it? I don't want the money. Not all of it, anyway. Alexander looked shocked. Margaret, that's your inheritance. Dad wanted you to have it. I know what he wanted. But I also know what I need, and $5 million is far more than I could ever spend. I'm 72 years old, Alexander. I don't need fancy cars or expensive clothes. I don't want to travel, my knees are bad, and I hate flying. I just want to stay in my little house, tend my garden, go to church on Sundays, and play bunco with my friends on Thursday nights. But the money could make you comfortable. I am comfortable. For the first time in my life, I don't have to worry about the electric bill or whether I can afford my prescriptions. That's all the comfort I need. I pulled out a notebook where I'd been writing down my thoughts. I've been making a list. There are things I want to do with James's gift. Real things. Important things. First, I said, running my finger down the page, I want to set up a fund at our church. Not for the building or the budget, they're doing fine. But for the people who come to us in need. The single mothers who can't pay their light bill. The families who need groceries. The elderly folks who can't afford their medicine. I want there to be money available, no questions asked, no judgment. Just help. Alexander was listening intently. Second, I want to do something at the community center in Mount Pleasant. They have after-school programs for kids, but they're always running out of supplies. I want to make sure those kids have everything they need, art supplies, sports equipment, musical instruments, computers. Whatever helps them discover who they are. That's beautiful, Margaret. Third, I want to help the women at the domestic violence shelter. I volunteer there sometimes, and you should see what these women go through. They leave with nothing, no money, no job, nowhere to go. I want to create a fund that helps them get back on their feet. First month's rent, work clothes, job training, childcare. Whatever it takes. I looked up at him. And fourth, I want to keep $1 million for myself. That's more than enough for me to live on for the rest of my life, with plenty left over for emergencies and the occasional splurge. The other $4 million goes to these causes. Margaret, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Your father spent his whole life building this wealth for a purpose. Not just to provide for me, but to make a difference. I'd be dishonoring his memory if I just sat on it. Alexander was quiet for a moment, then he smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him. What if we combined our efforts? Your $4 million and my inheritance. We could create a foundation. The James Crawford Foundation. We could do everything you're talking about, but bigger. We could help hundreds of families, thousands of kids. You'd want to do that? I'd be honored to do that. With your guidance and my resources, we could make a real impact. We could finish what Dad started and expand it beyond anything he imagined. I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. He'd like that. He'd like that very much. There's one more thing I need to ask you, Alexander said, suddenly nervous again. The letters. There are things in them about me, about my childhood, that I don't remember. Things that contradict what my mother told me. I need to know the truth, Margaret. I need to know what really happened back then. What did your mother tell you? She said he was violent. That he hit her. That she left because she was afraid for my safety. I closed my eyes. Oh, Alexander. Is it true? I took a deep breath. I'm going to tell you the truth, and it's not going to be easy to hear. But you deserve to know. Please. I met your father 6 months after his divorce was finalized. He was working at the electric company, living in a tiny apartment, trying to rebuild his life. We met at church. I was new to the area, and he offered to help me find an apartment. We became friends first. It took a long time before we became anything more. I paused, gathering my thoughts. One night, about a year after we met, before we were even dating, he broke down. Just completely fell apart. He told me about his marriage to your mother. He told me everything. What did he tell you? Your mother came from money, as you know. Old Charleston money. When she married your father, her family was furious. He was a working-class man, an electrician. They thought she'd married beneath her station. Her father actually tried to bribe James to leave her. Alexander's eyes widened. I never knew that. James refused, of course. He loved Vivian. He thought love was enough. But Vivian's family never accepted him. They made her life miserable. They cut her off financially. They stopped inviting her to family functions. She went from being a debutante to the wife of a tradesman, and she couldn't handle it. So she left? Not at first. At first, she tried to change him. She wanted him to go back to school, become an engineer, start his own company. She wanted him to be ambitious in the way her family understood ambition. But that wasn't who he was. He was happy being an electrician. He was good at it, he made decent money, and he got to work with his hands. That was enough for him. I stood and walked to the mantel, where a photo of James and me at our wedding sat in a simple frame. Things got worse after you were born. Vivian's family kept pressing her to leave him. They said you deserved better than a father who worked with his hands. They offered to support her if she'd divorce him. They even offered to pay for lawyers. And the abuse allegations? There was one incident. 1. Your mother was having an argument with James about money. She'd spent $300 on a dress they couldn't afford, and he'd asked her to return it. She got so angry that she threw a plate at him. It shattered against the wall. You were in the next room, crying. James tried to calm her down, tried to take her hands to keep her from throwing anything else. She pulled away from him hard, lost her balance, and fell. She bruised her arm and got a small cut on her forehead. Alexander went very still. 2 days later, her father showed up with lawyers and a doctor. They took photos of her bruises. They documented everything. They filed a police report claiming James had assaulted her. James tried to tell his side of the story, but no one wanted to listen. Her family had money and influence. He was just a working-class electrician. So the charges were pressed? They were filed, but the case never went to trial. The prosecutor didn't think there was enough evidence. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Your mother filed for divorce and got full custody. James's visitation was supervised at first, then limited, then eventually denied altogether. Her lawyers claimed you were afraid of him, that seeing him traumatized you. I wasn't afraid of him, Alexander whispered. I don't remember being afraid. You weren't. But you were 5 years old. You believed what the adults around you told you to believe. And your mother's family worked very hard to erase your father from your life. Alexander put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. My whole life is a lie. Everything I believed about my childhood, about my family, about myself, it's all a lie. I moved to sit beside him, putting my arm around his shoulders the way I used to comfort my Sunday school students. It's not a lie, sweetheart. It's just incomplete. Your mother loved you. She did what she thought was best. She was young and pressured and probably very confused. She kept me from my father for 47 years based on a lie. She kept you from him based on her truth. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. He looked up at me with devastated eyes. How do I live with this? How do I live knowing I wasted all that time? He was here, Margaret. He was right here in Charleston, and I never came. Not once. Not for Christmas or birthdays or holidays. When I got married, I didn't invite him. When my daughter was born, I didn't tell him. He had a granddaughter, and I never let him meet her. This was news to me. You have a daughter? Emma. She's 22 now. She's graduating from college this spring. His voice broke. She'll never meet her grandfather. She'll never know him. She can know him through you. Through the stories you tell her. Through the work you do in his name. Through these letters. It's not the same. No, I agreed. It's not. But it's what we have. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. James had always loved Charleston sunsets. He'd say they were God's way of reminding us that every day ends with beauty, no matter how hard it was. Margaret, Alexander finally said, would you come to dinner tomorrow night? I'd like you to meet Emma. I'd like to tell her about her grandfather. I'd like to start making things right. I'd love that. And after that, maybe we can start working on the foundation. Start figuring out how to use this money the way Dad would have wanted. That sounds perfect. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. Can I ask you one more question? Of course. Why are you being so kind to me? After how I treated you at the lawyer's office, after all the years I ignored my father, why are you helping me? I smiled. Because that's what James would have done. He forgave everyone everything. It was his greatest gift and his greatest flaw. He forgave your mother. He forgave you. He even forgave himself, eventually. How can I do any less? Alexander hugged me then, this tall stranger who was becoming less strange by the minute. He smelled like expensive cologne and regret, and he held on like a man drowning. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for loving him. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right. You're welcome, son. The word felt right. Natural. Like something that had been waiting to be said for 47 years, the James Crawford Foundation held its grand opening on a beautiful October morning. Exactly 1 year after James had passed. We chose the date deliberately. It felt like the right way to honor his memory. The event was held at one of the properties James had purchased back in the 90s. An old warehouse he'd renovated into a community center. It had taken 6 months and a lot of Alexander's money to transform it into something special, a job training center, a food bank, an after-school program, and office space for local nonprofits. All under one roof. I wore a new dress for the occasion, nothing fancy. Just a nice floral print from Belk's, and James's wedding ring on a chain around my neck. Alexander had offered to buy me designer clothes, but I declined. I was too old to change who I was, and I didn't want to. Alexander gave a speech to the crowd of about 200 people, city council members, nonprofit leaders, families from the neighborhood, and reporters from the Post and Courier. He looked different than he had 6 months ago. Less polished, somehow, but more real. He'd stopped wearing the expensive suits and Rolex watches. Today he was in khakis and a button-down shirt, looking more like his father than he probably realized. My father, James Crawford, worked as an electrician for 40 years, Alexander began. He wasn't famous. He wasn't powerful. Most people never knew his name. But he changed lives. Quietly, without recognition or praise, he spent his entire adult life building something that would outlast him. He gestured to the building behind him. This center represents his dream, a place where people can get help without judgment, where kids can discover their potential, where families can find hope when everything seems hopeless. My father built his wealth dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice, because he believed in this community and these people. Alexander's voice grew thick with emotion. I'm ashamed to say that I didn't know my father. I spent most of my life believing lies about who he was. I thought he was a failure because he didn't have money or status. But he was more successful than I ever dreamed of being. He had wealth I'm only beginning to understand, wealth of character, of purpose, of love. He pulled out a worn piece of paper from his pocket. This is from one of his letters to me. He wrote it 20 years ago. Success isn't measured in what you accumulate, but in what you give away. It's not about how much you have, but how much you help. And it's never about being better than anyone else, it's about being better than you were yesterday. Alexander looked directly at me, sitting in the front row. My father left me more than money. He left me a roadmap for how to live. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to follow it. The crowd applauded. I wiped my eyes with a tissue. Oh, James. If only you could see this. After the speeches, we toured the facility. The food bank was already stocked and serving families. The job training center had computers and classrooms ready for its first session next week. The after-school program had art supplies, musical instruments, and a small library. The nonprofit offices upstairs were being moved into by organizations that had been working out of church basements and living rooms. Emma, Alexander's daughter, walked with me through the building. She was beautiful, tall and blonde like her grandmother Vivian must have been. But with James's eyes and, I was discovering, James's heart. My dad's been different since he read those letters, she told me as we looked at the children's reading room. More present, somehow. Less obsessed with work and status. He actually took a vacation last month, first one in 10 years. We went to the mountains, just the two of us, and talked for hours about Grandpa James. Your grandfather would have loved you, I said. He always wanted to meet you. I know. Dad showed me some of the letters where Grandpa wrote about me. He'd seen my picture on social media, he'd been following me for years, apparently, through a fake account. He wrote about being proud of my grades, my volunteer work, my piano playing. He knew everything about me, and I never even knew he existed. Her eyes filled with tears. That's the saddest part. He loved me from a distance my whole life, and I never got to love him back. But you can love him now, I said gently. By continuing his work. By being the kind of person he would have been proud of. Love doesn't end when someone dies, Emma. It just transforms. She hugged me. Will you tell me more stories about him? I want to know everything. What he was like, what he loved, what made him laugh. I'd be happy to. Come to dinner next Sunday. I'll make his favorite meal, meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Nothing fancy, and we'll talk about him all night. I'd love that. We continued our tour and found Alexander in the job training center, talking to a single mother who was enrolling in the computer skills program. He was listening to her story with genuine interest, not the practiced sympathy of someone doing charity work, but real empathy. He'd changed so much in 6 months. He'd found something he'd been missing his whole life, purpose beyond profit. As the event was winding down, a woman approached me. She was probably in her mid-70s, expensively dressed in a way that screamed old Charleston money. Her face was vaguely familiar. Mrs. Crawford? She said hesitantly. Margaret Crawford? Yes. I'm Vivian's sister. Alexander's aunt. Caroline Prescott. I stiffened slightly. This was James's ex-wife's family. The family that had made his life miserable. I wanted to say something, Caroline continued, her voice shaking slightly. I wanted to apologize. For what my family did to James. For the lies we told. For keeping Alexander away from him. I was too shocked to respond. Vivian confessed the truth to me before she died, Caroline said. She told me what really happened that night, about the incident that led to the divorce. She told me that James never hurt her, that our father had pressured her to lie. That she'd gone along with it because she was young and scared and wanted her family's approval. Tears were streaming down Caroline's face now. She regretted it for the rest of her life. She wanted to reach out to James, to let Alexander have a relationship with him, but our father forbade it. And by the time Dad died, she thought it was too late. She thought James would never forgive her. He would have, I said softly. James forgave everyone. I know that now. I read about this foundation in the paper, about what James did with his life, about how he never stopped trying to reach Alexander. And I realized that my family destroyed something precious because of pride and prejudice. We took a good man and turned him into a villain in our own story, just because he didn't fit our idea of what success should look like. Caroline pulled an envelope from her purse. I found this in Vivian's things after she passed. She wrote it to James but never sent it. I thought maybe you'd want to have it. I thought maybe Alexander should see it. I took the envelope with trembling hands. Thank you. I'm so sorry, Margaret. For all of it. Your husband deserved better. Alexander deserved better. You all did. I surprised myself by reaching out and taking her hand. The past is past, Caroline. We can't change it. But we can learn from it. We can do better going forward. That's very generous of you. That's what James taught me. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It doesn't work. Caroline smiled through her tears. He sounds like he was a remarkable man. He was. He really was. After Caroline left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Vivian's handwriting, dated 3 years earlier. Dear James, I don't know if you're even alive to read this. I don't know if you'd want to hear from me after all these years. But I'm dying, liver cancer, the doctors say, and I need to tell you the truth before I go that I lied about you. I lied to Alexander, to my family, to the courts. You never hurt me. You were a good husband and a good father, and I threw that away because I was too weak to stand up to my family's expectations. My father convinced me that you weren't good enough. That Alexander deserved better than a working-class father. He made me believe that I was doing the right thing by cutting you out of our lives. But I wasn't. I was just being a coward. I watched our son grow up to be a man I barely recognize. He's successful by every measure that my family values, wealthy, powerful, connected. But he's not happy. He's not at peace. He has everything except the one thing he needed most, a father who loved him unconditionally. You gave him that love, even from a distance. I know you never stopped trying. I know you wrote letters and sent gifts and drove to Charlotte hoping for just a glimpse of him. My husband told me every time you showed up, every time he turned you away. He thought he was protecting us. He was just helping me maintain a lie. I'm sorry, James. I'm so deeply sorry. I stole your son from you, and I stole a father from him. I let pride and fear destroy something beautiful. If there's any way to make amends, any way to fix this, please tell me. I don't have much time left. I hope you found happiness. I hope you found someone who appreciated you for who you are, not who they wanted you to be. I hope you built a good life, and if you ever find it in your heart to forgive me, please know that it would mean everything. With deep regret. Vivian. I showed the letter to Alexander later that evening, when it was just the two of us. We were sitting in his car in my driveway, neither of us quite ready to say goodbye to the day. He read it twice, his hands shaking. When he finished, he folded it carefully and stared out the windshield. She knew, he finally said. She knew the whole time that she'd lied, and she never told me. Not until she was dying, and even then, she couldn't bring herself to send the letter. People are complicated, Alexander. We do terrible things for reasons that make sense at the time. Your mother was young and pressured and scared. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it. Dad never got this letter. He never knew she was sorry. Maybe not. But I think he knew anyway. I think he understood her better than she understood herself. Alexander looked at me with those eyes so like James's. How do you forgive something like this? How do you move forward? The same way your father did. One day at a time. One choice at a time. One act of kindness at a time. You can't change the past, but you can honor it by building a better future. Is that what we're doing? Building a better future. I think so. I think that's exactly what we're doing. The next Sunday, Emma came to dinner as promised. She brought her boyfriend, a nice young man studying education at the College of Charleston. Alexander came too, and to my surprise, so did Caroline and her husband. We sat around my small dining table, the same table where James and I had eaten thousands of meals together, and I served meatloaf and mashed potatoes and green beans from my garden. Nothing fancy. Nothing expensive. Just good food and good company. I told stories about James. About how he sang off-key in the shower. About how he couldn't dance to save his life but always insisted on one slow dance with me at church socials. About how he'd read the newspaper cover to cover every morning and argue with the editorial page like the writers could hear him. Alexander shared stories from the letters. About James's dreams of owning a boat someday and sailing around Charleston Harbor. About his love of old Western movies and blueberry pie. About his philosophical thoughts on everything from religion to politics to the proper way to make barbecue. Emma asked questions, trying to piece together the grandfather she'd never met from the fragments we gave her. And slowly, over meatloaf and mashed potatoes, James came alive again in that room. Not as a saint or a perfect man, but as a real human being who'd lived and loved and done his best. After dinner, we looked through old photo albums. There was James as a young man, lean and handsome in his army uniform. James on our wedding day, looking nervous and proud. James at church picnics and bowling leagues and fish fries. James in his electrician's uniform, hard hat in hand. James in our garden, holding a tomato the size of a softball. James everywhere, in every corner of my life. He had a good life, didn't he? Emma said softly. Even though he lost you, she looked at Alexander, and even though he never had much money, he had a good life. He had a great life, I corrected. He had everything that mattered. As everyone was leaving, Alexander pulled me aside. I've been thinking about something you said. About how Dad never blamed me. That's right. But I blamed myself. For 47 years, I've carried this guilt, this shame. Even before I knew the truth, there was always this voice in the back of my head saying I should have tried harder, done more, been better. And reading his letters, seeing how he lived, understanding his values, I realized that he would tell me to let it go. He would tell me that guilt is just another form of pride, thinking we have more control over our lives than we really do. He would tell me to forgive myself the way he forgave me. I nodded. That's exactly what he'd say. So that's what I'm trying to do. Every day, I wake up and I choose forgiveness. I forgive my mother for lying. I forgive her family for their prejudice. I forgive myself for being blind. And I try to live in a way that would make him proud. You already do, Alexander. Every single day. He hugged me tight. Thank you, Margaret. For everything. For loving him. For welcoming me. For showing me what it means to live with grace. You're welcome, son. They say time heals all wounds, but I don't think that's quite true. Time doesn't heal wounds, it gives us perspective on them. It helps us understand that our scars are proof we survived, not proof we failed. It's been 2 years since James died now. The James Crawford Foundation has helped over 500 families. The community center serves 300 children a week. The scholarship program has sent 12 kids to college. The affordable housing properties have given dozens of families a safe, decent place to live. Alexander quit his tech company and now works full-time running the foundation. He moved from Charlotte to Charleston, bought a small house near mine, and we have dinner together twice a week. Emma graduated and took a job teaching at an elementary school in North Charleston. She volunteers at the community center on weekends. I still live in my little house on Magnolia Lane. I still drive my Honda Civic. I still shop at Piggly Wiggly and clip coupons. Though I don't really need to anymore. Old habits die hard, and besides, there's something comforting about the familiar routines, but I've started traveling a bit. Nothing fancy, just weekend trips to the mountains, beach vacations with my church group. Alexander insists on paying, says it's what James would have wanted. He's probably right. I've also become something of a grandmother to Emma. She calls me Gram, and I love it. We bake cookies together and talk about boys, and I give her advice that she mostly ignores. It's perfect. People sometimes ask me if I'm angry that James kept secrets from me. If I'm hurt that he never told me about the money. The answer is no. He kept those secrets because he loved me, because he knew me well enough to know I'd never accept that kind of wealth. That I'd feel guilty having it while others went without. He gave me exactly what I needed: security, purpose, and the truth about his heart through those letters to Alexander. He gave his son what he needed too, an inheritance of values, not just money. And he gave both of us each other. That's the thing about James. He always knew what people needed, even when they didn't know themselves. He was a genius in the ways that matter most, understanding human hearts. Seeing through pretense to truth, knowing that real wealth is measured in relationships, not bank accounts. The other day, I was at the community center when a little boy came up to me. He was maybe 7 years old, wearing a shirt that was too big and shoes that were worn through at the toes. "Are you Mrs. Crawford?" he asked. "I am, sweetheart. My mama says your husband was an angel. She says he helped us when nobody else would." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "Your mama is very kind. But my husband wasn't an angel. He was just a man who tried to do right by people." "That's what an angel is," the boy said seriously. Then he ran off to play, out of the mouths of babes, as they say. So that's my story. That's how a humble widow who was mocked by a billionaire discovered that she'd been rich all along. Not rich in money, though that came as quite a surprise, but rich in love. Rich in memories. Rich in the knowledge that she'd been chosen and cherished by a remarkable man. And that billionaire? He discovered he'd been poor his whole life, despite his hundreds of millions. Poor in connection. Poor in purpose. Poor in the things that make life worth living. But he's not poor anymore. He's building the wealth that matters, one relationship at a time, one good deed at a time, one day at a time. As for me, I'm 74 years old now. I'm slowing down. My knees ache in the morning. I forget names sometimes. I take too many pills and too many naps. But I'm happy. I'm at peace. I'm surrounded by love. Every night before I go to sleep, I hold James's wedding ring, the one I wear on the chain around my neck, and I tell him about my day. I tell him about Alexander's latest project, about Emma's classroom stories, about the families the foundation is helping. I tell him that I miss him, that I love him, that I'll see him again someday, and sometimes, when the moon is bright and the Charleston air is soft and sweet, I swear I can feel him next to me. Not a ghost, not a spirit, just a presence. A reminder that love doesn't die. It just transforms. James used to say that the best inheritance you can leave is not money, but an example of how to live. He left us both, the wisdom to value what matters, the courage to forgive what doesn't, and the grace to move forward with open hearts. That's the real fortune. That's the true wealth. And it's worth more than all the money in the world. So if you're listening to this story and you're thinking about your own life, about your own regrets and mistakes and missed opportunities, let me tell you what I've learned: it's never too late. It's never too late to reach out. It's never too late to forgive. It's never too late to choose love over pride, connection over control, understanding over judgment. Alexander thought he'd lost his father forever. But in losing him, he found him, really found him, in a way that might not have been possible if James were still alive. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the hardest losses. I thought I'd married a poor man. And I had, poor in the world's eyes, anyway. But he was rich where it counted. And he made me rich too, in all the ways that matter. That arrogant billionaire who walked into the lawyer's office 2 years ago? He doesn't exist anymore. He's been replaced by a humble, grateful man who's learning every day what his father knew all along, that success is spelled LOVE, and wealth is measured in the lives you touch. And this humble widow? She's not so humble anymore. Not because she has money, but because she finally understands her worth. Not in dollars, but in the love she gave and received. In the life she built. In the legacy she's helping to continue. James always said that in the end, we're all just stories. The question is, what story will you tell? What will people say about you when you're gone? Will they remember your bank account or your kindness? Your possessions or your presence? Your success or your service? Choose wisely. Because in the end, that's the only thing that matters. That's the only wealth that lasts. That's the only inheritance worth leaving. Thank you for listening to my story. Now go write yours.